Mr. Semenza. We chatted for a while, and he took me to the desk of the person who was in those days in charge of hiring and firing. I was asked if I could type, and I said, no, I can't, but I'd be delighted to learn. Can you take shorthand? I said, no, but also, I can't tell you how happy I would be to take the course. And this gentleman said, what I think we'll do is we'll employ you as a utility at $256 a month. Be here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. I left there and all I could think of was, how can I spend $256 in only 30 days? Thus began my career in international. In the late 50s through the 60s, Bank of America did phenomenal overseas expansion in every country in the world. And I had the good fortune of learning the ropes of international banking in all the various departments that I utilitied in, if there is such a word. Probably, I would say 60 to 75% of the people with whom I worked were foreign born. Everybody was very polite. Everybody was Mr. and Mrs. The one, thinking back on it, the one downside, we worked in a very large room. Everybody smoked. There wasn't a single person who didn't smoke. Anyway, by 1974, 15, 16 years later, I had reached the level of assistant vice president. I was heading a group called International Relocations. We were responsible for assigning American staff and their families from San Francisco to various overseas locations. I had a call that I was to meet with an executive on the 52nd floor of Royal Banking Division. So, with great trepidation, I went up there, and this gentleman had just been appointed to head the Europe, Middle East, and Africa Division, which was going to be located in London. And it was the bank's feeling that they would be able to transact business so much better if they shortened that 6,000 plus mile distance between management in San Francisco and the people in the field. So in the course of the conversation, the gentleman, Mr. Rice, said to me, I've reviewed your file, and if you are interested, we think that you would be an excellent candidate for a personnel officer in London. Well, I said, I've been to London and I think it's wonderful and I'd be happy to accept the assignment. Now, I must at this time advise you of the following. When the Employment Act of 1972 was passed, 3 women in Bank of America filed a class action suit indicating that the bank had discriminated in myriad ways against women. One of these ways was that they had not ever assigned women overseas. So rather than see myself as this fantastic employee who had somehow been such a standout that they were sending me as the first woman, I knew that they were also complying with what they had to do under that agreement. I arrived in London in the summer of 1974, and part of the overseas benefits package was that all housing was paid for by the bank. There was tax equalization, cost of living adjustments. I mean, it was not a difficult situation in which to find oneself. The other excellent thing was that the people who did the leasing of real estate for the bank had found a flat in Portman Square in London that was available for me. It was 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, and it had the added benefit of being within walking distance of our office, which was in Old Park Lane. For those of you who know London, Old Park Lane is at the end of Piccadilly, right along Hyde Park. So they were fabulous walks to and from work. The work itself was at first a lot of time spent away from London, because part of my commitment was that I was to visit as many of our branches as I possibly could during the first year. And the most pressing visits were in the 4 branches in France and the 3 in Greece, because then, as I'm sure is true now, they had nothing but union problems. So it was showing the flag from the London headquarters and talking with these people. Probably in, I would say, early December of 1974, I was in my office, and a gentleman, an English gentleman, who had just been hired from the British Bank of the Middle East, came into my office and he said, "Miss O'Connor, I understand you live in Portman Square." I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Well, my wife and I are staying at the Portman Hotel awaiting our visa into Nigeria, and we would be so happy if you would join us for dinner some night." And I said, I went nowhere, I did nothing. I said, "Oh, I'd be happy to." He said, "Are you available 2 weeks on Wednesday?" I could have been available anytime. But I said, 2 weeks on Wednesday is fine, thank you so much. A week passed, enter the same gentleman. I thought, oh, here's trouble. He said, "Miss O'Connor, with regard to dinner next week." I said, "Yes." He said, "I happened to run into an old friend of mine yesterday who's in London in hospital, and I've asked him to join us for dinner." And going through my mind is they have to now go to hospitals to find somebody to make a foursome for dinner. Anyway, the night arrived. I walked into the lobby of the Portman Hotel. There was my friend Gordon Abernathy standing with this other gentleman who was on crutches. I was introduced to him as Fred Dargie, and I thought, I will never in my life remember that name. And Gordon said, "If you'll excuse me, I'm going upstairs to get Maggie, my wife, will join you in the cocktail lounge." So because I was so well raised, I never noticed anyone's disability. And I decided not to let this person know that he was on crutches. So I said, what do you do? He said, "I'm a Scottish gentleman adventurer." I thought to myself, sitting by myself at home, eating dinner, watching television is not a bad thing. So I thought, well, it's going to be a long night, but let me pursue this. I said, "Now, what do you really do?" He said, "I'm a mercenary." I said, "Where do you mercen?" He said, "The Oman." I said, "That's Amman, Jordan?" He said, "That's Oman, the bloody Gulf." So, it just started out beautifully. During the course of dinner, I learned that he had been on he and his brother were air traffic control officers in Salalah, which is the capital of Oman, and he had been coming down Muscat is the capital, Salalah was where they were based. He had been coming down the steps of this air control tower one evening, fallen, and had smashed his hip and leg, was airlifted first to an operation in Beirut, and then eventually they got him back to the UK, and so he was recuperating from this accident. I came home for Christmas that year. I traveled again early in the beginning of 1975. Finally, he and I got together probably in February, and we started going out together. He told me that he had been employed by a company. He was the sales manager for a group that sold military equipment throughout the Middle East under license from the UK. Time passes. In October of 1975, we were scheduled to go out to dinner one night. He was late. I was annoyed. He came in, and I guess could tell I was upset. He came towards where I was sitting, threw a box into my lap, and said these immortal words: "Take that and put it on, or you'll never see me again." So I thought, I'm not sure what my response should be. But before I even opened the box, he had walked to the telephone, called Edinburgh, and said, "Mother, Kate, and I are engaged." So clearly, we were engaged. He came back to San Francisco with me for Christmas that year, and to this day, my nieces and nephews, who were very small at the time, said, "We didn't know what language that guy spoke. We had no idea."
That's a very good story.
Time passes, and I always knew that I was coming back to San Francisco. So we were living in Beecham Place, which was a fabulous part of London, at Knightsbridge, having a wonderful time. And I said, "Fred, I think it's time for us to go back to the States." He was fine with that. We came back to San Francisco in 1978. He didn't want to live in San Francisco, so we moved to Sausalito, and we bought a condo in the Anchorage. Fred opened an antique store, story for another day. We continued with our jobs. By let me get the year, I am going to say 1996, I had been with the bank for 40 years. I was 60 years of age. There had been a hostile takeover by Nations Bank in Charlotte, North Carolina. Who ever heard of it? But all of a sudden, all the jobs that were being done in San Francisco were being transferred to Charlotte, North Carolina. I was asked if I could go on a business trip to Charlotte, and it would take probably 4 to 6 weeks, at which time I could explain my job. I was doing immigration at that time for all the people. Technology had meant that we had a whole new group of people that we were sourcing, bringing into this country, many of whom had to have L visa, J visa, green cards. We worked with the State Department and outside legal help in managing this. I was told to go to Charlotte and explain everything I did to the person who would be taking my job. And I thought there's something wrong with this, and I said, "I'm really more than willing to continue in this job." And they said, "But you qualify for full retirement." Well, I guess that meant retire or not. I happen to remember the name of the attorneys that the three ladies had used when they sued Bank of America. I made an appointment to see them. I told them my story. They said, "We will be happy to represent you. We will contact Bank of America. You are to have no further conversations with them." Some 8 or 9 months later, Bank of America settled with me. The end of my story with Bank of America. I don't know how much time. Okay, I have 5 minutes left. Just to prove that I was not ready to retire, I stayed at home for about, I'd say maybe almost a year. We went back to England and Scotland for the millennium. So maybe I was off of work a little over a year. I read the Sunday paper one day, and they were advertising, West America Bank in Nevada was advertising for tellers. I had never been a teller, but how hard is that? So I applied for teller. I told them I never wanted a position where I had to manage people. Okay with them. For the next 16 years, I was a teller at West America Bank in Nevada. My story of a fabulous work career. Thank you all for listening. Probably the most famous person I met was a gentleman that I sat next to on a first class. Another thing, I only flew first class the whole time, which was certainly an advantage. I was sitting next to a gentleman on a flight from San Francisco to London, and I thought I recognized him, and the stewardesses were very solicitous of his needs. And all of a sudden, I realized it was Lee J. Cobb, the actor, but he didn't have hair, which threw me off a little. And so I thought, well, I'm certainly not going to let him know that I know who he is. So he started talking to me. He said, you're on your way to London for vacation? I said, no. I said, I live there. He said, oh, you're married? I said, no, I work for Bank of America. Now, I had thought we would be talking about On the Waterfront and Marlon Brando and all of his wonderful. He started in on Bank of America. And I had to at one point get up. It was one of those planes that had an upstairs, downstairs in first class. I eventually had to get up and move upstairs because I had heard so much about people he despised in the Beverly Hills office of Bank of America. The most influential, without a doubt, my father. My father left school when he was a sophomore in high school. He left school in order to drive a truck for my grandfather, who was going into the concrete business. My brother-in-law and nephew currently have that same business under my brother-in-law's name. My father put 7 children through excellent schools, built a family along with my mother that we are as close today as any family I know. So I would say he was. Yes?
Kathleen, what was in the box that you had to wear?
Oh, the ring. Sorry, I thought that one without an explanation, but what do I know?
We thought it might be a little thing.
Anyway, well, it's been a pleasure